I'm Kimberly Fournier, and I teach the big introductory human anatomy class here at URI. And it's a big service course that is a foundational course for many areas, many of the allied health fields, so nursing, pharmacy, kinesiology, biomedical engineering, nutrition, and so on. And so we have two sections of 250 students this semester, and we are working to improve student success in this class. And so, let me make sure this is advancing. Yeah, okay. There we go. So, what we've noticed since I started here, when I started teaching, actually when I took the course, a human anatomy course over 20 years ago, it was taught very traditionally, lecture in a lab format. When I was a TA for 5 years straight, it was a very traditional format, lecture and a lab associated with it. When I got to URI, it was being taught very traditionally, 20-some years later, lecture, lab format. And what we were noticing is that the students were starting to really complain. And there was this underlying anxiety in this class that was really affecting their success. And so after a difficult semester where we had a lot of complaints, I joined the G2C process here at URI. We created a course committee, and we sat down with stakeholders from all the various colleges and offices on campus and discussed student success in the class and what we could do to improve it. And so we came up with a bunch of recommendations, and some of them were institutional in nature, and some of them were course-specific in nature. So in terms of the course-specific recommendations, what I could address immediately myself was content. They were struggling with the amount of content and the skills necessary to negotiate a content-heavy course. They were taking it in their freshman year, and so it became an issue for them. So we reduced the content. We hired a lab coordinator to manage the TAs and train them so that they could help in the process. And then we sort of got into these other innovations that we could introduce in terms of in the classroom. And so we introduced flipped pedagogy, which isn't new to many of you, but for 2 of our units we introduced flipped pedagogy, and then we also introduced something called the 2-stage exam, group exams. And this is what I want to talk to you a little bit today. So when I implemented all of these changes, being a scientist, I want to know that it works. When I change it, I want to see that I'm making an improvement, otherwise I'm just wasting my time. And so we sort of set up this study that would sort of allow us to look at whether or not these innovations were working. And so what you see here, I'll discuss it really quickly, is the setup of our study this semester. We have 2 sections of human anatomy, and we cover 4 units. And for each of these units, they had 2-stage exams. And then for these middle 2 units, which were the most difficult units of the course, we flipped in those units. And so what was happening is one section would flip that unit and the other section would stay traditional. And for the second unit, we would swap that. So each section only ever experienced one flip unit, and we had a control in the other section. And so we wanted to see, did the flip help with this content, and did the 2-stage exams help with this content? So the two-stage exams, the way they're set up is you put your students in groups. They come into the classroom. They take an individual exam by themselves, no talking. 25 questions is what we did in my class. They hand in all of their individual questions, and then I give one group exam to each of the groups. And now this group exam is a subset of the individual questions that they just saw. And so now they have to discuss it and come to a consensus in terms of which was the right answer. They're highly engaged because it's an exam. They're going to fight for their answer because they want the points. And so you get this rowdy discussion, and they have to come to a consensus for that one answer. And so the idea of the 2-stage exam is that it promotes learning in the exam, so students actually leave with the right answer. They know immediately what they got wrong on their individual exam, have a discussion, and leave knowing the answer to that question for the most part. It reduces anxiety, it helps a little bit with the grade. You weight the exam so that it's 85% for the individual exam, 15% for the group exam. So it helps a little bit with the grade, but overall what we were striving to do was decrease the anxiety and promote learning, student skills in our students. And so what you're looking at here is data from my section. This is Unit 2 and Unit 3, and you're looking at the 15 group questions that were on the group exam. So these are the questions that were first on the individual and then repeated again on the group exam. When you look at the orange bars for each one of those 15 questions, you can see the percentage of students that got that right on the individual exam. And right next to it, the blue bar for each one of those questions is what percentage of students got it right after the group portion of the exam. So every single question that showed up on that group exam, more students got that question right once they did the group portion. So they were, if they had gotten it wrong initially, they had the discussion and came to the right answer, and so they left knowing the answer to that question. And you can see it for both of the exams. So you can sort of see how the individual mean on the exam was 70.3. The group means were somewhere up around 85, and after weighting 85 and 15%, we ended up with a final mean of 72.8, for example, in this particular unit. What you're seeing here is some information that we pulled out for the flipped pedagogy. So we looked at 2 units that were really difficult, and what you're looking at here is the data for 2 sections. One section is flipped, one section is traditional. And you can see that the green is the traditional delivery and the purple is the flipped delivery. And so for this unit exam for Unit 2, you can sort of see that the distribution is very similar in terms of shape. But in terms of the distribution, you can see that we pulled some students out of the F range and sort of redistributed it along to the left here. And so the flipped pedagogy seems to be improving the grades for our students in this particular unit. So in one section where the delivery was traditional, the average was 72.8, and for that same section, it was 76.2 for the flipped delivery. When we look at the second unit over here, which is the most difficult unit, I think, in the semester, it's a little alarming at first because you see the green bars that are a little bit higher. And so you think, oh, maybe traditional is better, which is okay if that's what we figure out is that's what we see from the data. But what you see here is that we actually had an increase for our A's in the flipped pedagogy. So the purple is much higher than the green in the A's. So we certainly shifted some students into the A's with the flipped pedagogy, and that had to come from somewhere. So it sort of came from those B's and C's. And when you look down at the C and D range, it doesn't look like either of those approaches really did anything different. It was a very difficult unit, and 20% failed regardless. Okay, so this is what I wanted to be able to see, that what we were doing was having some sort of effect, and it seems that both of them are. They're learning with the group exams, and the flipped pedagogy is helping them improve their grades as well. So just to give you a quick snapshot of what the group exam looks like, I'll have Josh play it.
Yes.
Exam, and then you had it the first time that we did it, and Josh was here, and then we did the group part, and they were just buzzing. And after they were done, they ran to their bags and started arguing with each other to prove that one was right over the other. It was the strangest thing to see. I was so happy. It was great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about where we're at in our introductory physics course, Physics 203. Some of the details are listed here. First semester, mostly engineering majors, fairly high DFWI rates, and as part of G2C, we is that better? But then, is there anything more I can?
You're well. maybe.
Anyway, partly as part of joining G2C effort, we've been trying to tweak the course to improve student success in various ways. Basically, some of these changes were already in place or working that direction, but one of the big challenges is that there are 3 sections with different instructors, so we've tried to align those better by having common lecture schedule, common exam schedule, common homework as an online system, common labs and recitations. And again, some of these things are already in place, and some we've instituted in the last year as a result of participating in the G2C program. This has led to more interactions and discussions with the Academic Enhancement Center. what we're trying to do now is tweak and improve the supplementary instruction sessions and the recitation sections that are part of the course, with eventually the idea of integrating them somehow so they'll be more effective. Also, we've had better communication with the engineering advisors, which are the main population for this class, for these classes. I would say that probably the two most important factors that will down the road lead to better student success in these courses. It has nothing to do with what we're doing in physics, but the two things listed at the bottom. One is the institution of a math placement exam, which I think is really going to be, is already an important component in improving student preparation going into the course. And secondly, some of the engineering departments have changed their course sequence, so students are now taking Physics 203 in their second semester, in the spring semester of their freshman year, and I think that extra semester of adjustment is important too. We still have some challenges. Most of the instructors in the course are lecturers or per course or adjuncts, and so aligning them all or seeing what we can do to align all the sections is a challenge. There's some inconsistent use, for example, in whether we use clickers in class, using Sakai. We have common exam days but not common exams, and there's a different philosophy among instructors as to what is the best way to give an exam, whether it be problem-based or multiple choice. And also, we really need to have a better and effective early alert system that will inform the students, if they're doing poorly early on, and also decide, how that information should be transmitted. Is it through the instructors, through the advisors, or whatever? And so hopefully that'll be in place down the line. That's it.
I use my teaching voice, but it'll help Michael and have him use it. Good morning. I'm Dr. Cindy Britton, and I'm delighted to be here to tell you about the innovations in Chem 103, which is also one of the 5 G2C courses at URI. Chem 103 is introductory chemistry as opposed to Gen Chem that the engineering and the pharmacy students take. This is the one that's taken by the allied health science students, so that's nursing, nutrition, dietetics, kinesiology, physical therapy, so many of the same students that Kim has. And then we also have the textile science students. It's a rather large course, about 900 students a year. We teach 4 sections in the fall and usually 2 in the spring. And this is in our big Pastori auditorium, which is 180 students per section. The DFWI rates, the unproductive grades, have averaged between 22 and 24% over the last several years. And there are currently 3 lecturers teaching the course. These are non-tenure track faculty, and I'm one of those 3. This is to give you an idea of the innovations that we've done in Chem 103 over the years. Like Dave Heskett, we haven't sat idly by. We've been working to improve the course ever since I arrived here at URI, which was 2006. That's when I came back to academia after having been an instructional developer for the Procter & Gamble company. And that first year, we just did our skill summaries, but by the following year, I realized, well, we need to have 1-page lessons on some of the more challenging skills. We happily released old exam questions. We worked with Catherine and David in the AEC to start supplemental instruction, and all the materials were made available on a chemistry department course website. Over the next couple of years, as URI went to Sakai, by golly, we started using Sakai. The very first day, I had a freshman come up to me and say, Dr. Britton, all my other classes have a Sakai tab except chemistry. And I realized, I don't want my class out of sight, out of mind. I'm in Sakai. And then through the terrific online Teaching Fellows workshop and a proposal that was funded by the Provost's office, I started something called Prepare, Participate, Practice. This was modeled on Erica Madger's peer instruction method, which many of you are familiar with because that was a CEMS talk some time ago. And then we joined G2C. And so that took place the end of 2012, beginning of 2013. And so those last 2 are things that have been underway since we joined G2C. The Prepare, Participate, Practice learning method was spread across all the sections, taught by all the lecturers. And then in the second year of G2C, we were told that we need to start sending feedback intervention messages on a regular basis, early and often. And because we didn't yet have a system within the institution Tim Wasco in the chemistry department stepped up and programmed one for us. And this is something else I did for the first time last year. We added a growth mindset activity and realized that there's growth mindset at lots of institutions, but how many of them actually have the brand Think Big? And so we found a couple of big thinkers who were former Chem 103 students and presented them and said, look, 2 years ago, four years ago, these were just like you. They arrived at URI, they were nervous freshmen, but they thought big, they had big hopes, big dreams, but big anxieties too. And they worked hard and overcame it. And we had them do a writing assignment, and you see the response from one student, and we introduced our Prepare, Participate, Practice as a way that you could grow your brain. We're providing a method for you to think big and grow your brain, and you see the students were quite responsive to that. And so here is the Prepare, Participate, Practice learning process. You know this from the Measure method. The students need to come to class prepared with tutorials, skill checks, and so forth. They come to class and participate. This was the skills book that we produced, even with the paper clicker cards that they held up to show their answers and which way the equilibrium was shifting with the Chavalier's principle. And then they had the skill practice outside of class, both in the skills book and the online homework system. And I really wanted to show you this. These were some of the intervention messages that we sent out. We followed what they had done at the Purdue Pass Note method, where the messages were optimized for length and a balance of positive and come on, get going, I believe in you. And you see this was when we sent out at the beginning as we were starting our studies in chapter 2, and Andrew responded very happily. This is what we have in store for the future, for the fall. As Kim mentioned, we need to measure this stuff, so we're going to use a chemical concepts inventory to measure it. Josh is going to come in and make observational methods of the classroom learning norms. We're going to use clickers, and so we're very excited about this coming fall.
Good morning. I'm Laura DeMillo Barnes, and I'm very passionate about math. I'm kind of crazy passionate, right? My students think I'm nuts. But I'm passionate about math, and I'm passionate about helping them become real thinkers. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the approaches that the math department and I are taking for pre-calculus math 111. So currently, we're doing a number of things. This is the first year that we've had the proctored placement and that it's been enforced, and it seems to be working. For example, our most recent grade 3 exams, grades were up 3% from the fall and 6% from last spring. So it seems that students are entering pre-calculus better prepared. And to David's point, we hope that continues and is useful to other departments as well. We offer supplemental instruction sessions. There were about 39 sessions offered this last semester, but unfortunately they're not very well attended. The average is about 5 to 6 students. So we'll be working with AEC to determine how to make that more effective. We provide practice exams with solutions in between a pre-test and the exam, and the students really love those. They work individually, they work together, and it really seems to help them be prepared for the exam. This semester we also wrapped our exams with reflections, and we wrapped the pre-test with reflections. So students wrote down what they did to prepare, how they felt about it, how they felt they did, what they might do differently. And we've collected that information, and we'll be looking at it. It'll just help us determine whether there's more things we can do through AEC to help students study and prepare better. So this is my first year with URI, but I've been an adjunct for a while I finished up my corporate technology career. And no matter where I was teaching, whether it was a large or small university or a college, or public or private, or even particularly at the community college, I always hear the same thing. I hate math. Math and I don't get along, or I've been told I'm not good at math. All those negative comments. So at some point every semester, I always talk to my students about Henry Ford and the automated assembly, and what he said about it. And I really do feel that for most students, their success is tied to their self-belief. And so they think about that a little bit. But since coming to URI, this semester I decided to provide a little bit of a stronger message. So for the day one assignment for my pre-calc classes, and actually my algebra class, I had them watch the Khan You Can Learn Anything video. And then I had them send me an email where they could tell me anything they wanted about themselves and about math, and I had them provide 2 ratings. First of all, do you like math? Yes, no, or neutral. And secondly, how do you rate your ability in math? Now, not what somebody's told you about your ability, but how do you rate your own ability? Above average, average, or below average. And of my 250 students, only about 62% responded, so I've got to figure out how to make that a better response rate. But 26% emphatically said, I hate math, just right off the bat. And about 79% rated themselves as average or below average. I think those 2 statistics put students at a disadvantage before we even start the learning process. So I tried to negate these negative thoughts. And I did that, wait a minute, did you catch that? Negate the negative, right? Okay, positive, there we go. So I responded to each student in an individual email, and I tried to make some kind of personal connection with them. And I also tried to talk to them about their fears and their concerns about the course. So I reminded them of the support structures that are in place. I reminded them about my caring about how they did. And I just tried to start this semester in a positive way. I just asked the students to re-rate themselves at the end of the semester, and so I'll be spending some time this summer to figure out, if that made a difference at all. Are we on? Oh, sorry, I have the mic on one. So something's up. Okay, thanks. Oh, well, I'm going to be a little bit more than
Okay, that's
I'm sorry. Okay. In addition to attitudes about math, prerequisite skills are important and are a success factor. So currently, before a major concept that relies on algebra skills, I actually have the class use worksheets and complete worksheets during class time. Students can work alone, they can work in groups, they can work with me, they can work with their notes, open note, open book, that whole idea. And it helps them brush up on the topic that we need just before we go into the pre-calculus topic. So with the help of a CEMS grant, thank you, CEMS, we'll try to formalize this process of these just-in-time review worksheets and add it to the 111 curriculum for the fall. We also plan on seeking out students who have been successful in 111. Maybe it took them twice to be successful, but I'd like to interview them and videotape them about what they thought their success factors were, and then share it with 111 students at the beginning of the semester. All right, let's see. Yay. Some of the other practices that I employ is I borrow heavily from Patrick Allett, and I try to create a classroom that's special. So I want students to be focused and engaged, and I want them to be able to share my passion for math and to share my passion for their learning. And maybe even have a little fun, I don't know. So this is much easier to do in smaller classes, and I'm trying to learn how to modify my approach for the bigger lectures, which is where the trend is for Math 111. For some students, math is like a foreign language, so I encourage them to create translation dictionaries as if they were going to a foreign land, and keep those with them throughout the semester so they can get a better feel for the way math and English interact. And I try to include interesting applications in the curriculum because I always hear, well, I'll never use this, right? Well, I don't use math. Oh, yes, you do. And so last semester, I had the students read about investment rates of return and actually had them do an exercise where they calculated how much money they would need now in order to retire with $1 million. So they really enjoyed that. And some other type of applications. So try to have a little bit of fun and see that, yes, math is important and it's hard, but you can do it. So I have really high expectations for my students, and I'm unwilling to compromise my standards, and I know the math department here is the same way, so it's a great fit. And we will continue to figure out ways in which to give our students more opportunities for success, particularly in Math 111. Thank you.
So good morning, I'm Jose Amador, and I teach intro, I teach an intro course, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I teach soil microbiology using problem-based learning, and what Josh is distributing is the first problem that you get in my class the first day you show up. I say good morning, and I ask somebody to read the problem out loud. So that's part one of 3 parts. I don't distribute a syllabus, that's all on Sakai, blah, blah, blah. So we get to work right away. This is a course for seniors in natural resources science, environmental science majors, as well as the stray geoscience and civil engineer that sometimes finds their way to my course. Usually between 15 and 20 people. We start with 25, we don't end with 25. After the first day, a lot of people will just go, yeah, this is not for me, he's not lecturing, see ya, which is fine. So first thing you do in problem-based learning is you pose a problem. And so you have the problem in front of you, and there are a number of features that if you're going to do this, you want to think about. Your problem needs to be authentic. It has to be from real life or feel like real life. In my case, a lot of the problems are from consulting work that I've done or research problems or that I've worked on. You get to design your problem. So if you're trying to figure out what your students are going to learn from your problem, you should probably start with the end in mind and go, okay, so what is it that I want my students to learn? And then kind of craft your story, your problem based on that. It has to be an open-ended kind of problem. It cannot have one solution, because as soon as that smart kid figures it out, game over, right? And then what are you going to do for the next 45 minutes? It has to be engaging. You can't be boring. Things have to move along in the story. There has to be a story that often it helps them. The student is the protagonist of the story. And you have to keep moving it along. And also, finally, you have to apply the Goldilocks principle. That is, it cannot be too easy, too hard. It has to be just right. So you pose a problem, and then the other really important part of this is that you ask questions. And here's a series of questions that I tell them they should be asking themselves. What is it that we know about this problem, about the answers to these questions in the problem, and how are they relevant? And then after you figure out what you know, what do we need to know and how it's relevant to answering the questions or solving the problem, and then how do we find this out? So this is a cycle that goes on for the whole semester. And then after they've had a chance to read the problem, hear about it, etc., they get to discuss matters first in small groups that are permanent for the whole semester. So they will go through the cycle, what do we know, what do we need to know, blah, blah, blah. After some amount of time, when they then start discussing the Red Sox, we move on to, okay, the same day, I asked one person from each group to present their answers to the what do we know, what do we need to know, how we're going to find it out, to the whole class and have a whole class discussion. And this goes on for all parts of the problem, and I usually have between 4 or 5 problems for the whole semester. And the class time is taken up with all these group and whole group discussions. As well as we have to assess things, of course. So to do that, we have at the end of every problem, there's a group presentation where they present their answer or their solution to the problem, and they have to defend it. So it's open for questions from me as well as other students. There's an individual exam as well as, and it's a take-home exam as well as a group exam, and we've had the same experience where, you know, the group exams are very lively, sometimes almost violent. but they do, you know, you see the improvement, and a lot of people are like, oh, I missed that. But, you know, at least now I do. And finally, well, not finally, there's a group paper where they have to, after the presentation, explain their solution to the problem, and there's a peer evaluation just so that the right people get the rewards or punishments depending on their, you know, their, how they perform this in their groups. And the peer evaluation actually affects their grade in the group paper. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. I have been doing this since 2001 for this course. It's actually the first time I tried problem-based learning was in this course. I got to problem-based learning because lecturing was not particularly effective. Even the really smart kids where, you know, stuff came in one way and not the other. And so I thought there's got to be a better way. I went to a lecture that described PBL, and I said, oh yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So I've done that, and I found that learning in context, learning the content in the context of a problem really, really helps people make connections, retain stuff, and so I've stuck with that. And so, you know, this is kind of a short description. If you want more information, there's a shameless plug for a couple of books. One on practice of problem-based learning. This is described in a lot more detail in that book. And then I've done this online as well for an intro soil science class, and it works very well as well. So thank you.
I'm Deborah Matthews in the Department of Computer Science and Statistics, and I teach the Introductory Programming Design course. So the first question is, what is Introductory Programming Design? And it's writing a program following the principles of good design. So what do I mean by that? Well, it needs to be clear. It needs to be well documented. It needs to be efficient. It needs to be easy to debug and to maintain. It needs to be secure. Most of all, we need to be able to write a piece, and then if we decide that we have a better way of doing it, take that piece out and put another piece in, and it will fit seamlessly. So why do we have, why do they need to do this? Well, most of the people who are taking this course are going to be going out and doing computer programming, software engineering. They need to be able to fit their work into a larger whole. So they need to be able to understand how the larger whole works, and they need to be able to write according to specifications. Who takes the course? Computer science majors, computer engineering majors, applied math majors, physics majors, and assorted others. Why do we require prior programming experience and pre-calculus? Well, if we're asking people to think about how to design a program, it's very difficult for them at the same time to ask, how do I write an if statement? How many times should I loop? How do I write a function? How do I call a function? So we want people to be conversant in writing programs before they get to this class so they can use their brain power thinking about better design decisions. Why do we require pre-calculus? Well, there is a strong correlation between success in math and success in programming. So the problems. The worldwide rate of passing the first computer programming course is 67%. There were 2 studies done that both came to that same mean. There is a wide variance, but it's still alarming that that we lose 1/3 of the students worldwide in that course. And this is more alarming when you consider that of all the students graduating with computer science degrees in the United States, only 18% are women. So we have to ask, are there early bars to success and how can we address them? So what are some of the explanations for why people aren't doing as well in that early programming course? Well, one is lack of previous experience. Part of that is they're not well prepared for it. They're not ready for it. But another part is that people have taken math and English for years. They know what they're getting into when they take a math course. When they're taking their first programming course, it's because they like, it may be because they like playing video games. Maybe they like taking apart computers. So they have no idea what they're getting into. And some of the people who are not succeeding, they're not succeeding because they don't like it. It may be too abstract for some. In 1983, someone did research using Jean Piaget's model of intellectual development and used an instrument, divided people into 3 categories. Late concrete, those are people who had difficulty with ratios and with probabilistic reasoning. Early formal and then late formal. The people who placed into the late formal were good at deductive logic. They could do propositional and correlational reasoning. They could do permutations. Well, surprise, surprise, the people in the late concrete had a very difficult time passing that first programming course, where the people who were in that late formal stage were the ones getting A's. This is another reason why we require pre-calculus, because with the growth mindset, if they can continue to practice their math skills, they may be able to think more abstractly before they get to that first the programming course. Well, maybe we're not identifying misconceptions and clearing them up very well. One of the tools that physics has used is the concept inventory, and we're still at early stages. There have been a couple of concept inventories developed for computer programming, but they're just now being released. So that may be one thing that we can use to improve performance. And then there are other factors specifically for women that may have nothing to do with conceptual content. What if you're the only woman in a class, you look around, you see no one's there. If you have the wrong answer to a question, well, is that contributing to the idea that women can't do this? It puts more stress, making it even more difficult. And maybe they look around and they think, maybe I don't belong. So what are we doing to address this at URI? Well, in my course, we are using more active learning. They have to watch the lecture outside of class and do the homework assignments. They're difficult problems, things that are engaging them before they get to class, and it's worth 10% of their grades, so they actually do it for the most part. And then in class, rather than watching someone passively, they have to respond using clickers, so they have to invest and say, this is what I think the right answer is, and if they're not all getting it right, they talk to each other with the peer instruction model. And they have to convince someone else why their answer is correct. They listen to the other person, so that, again, they're engaged in the problem. And then we have collaboration in labs, so that they are actively working on the problem, the more difficult problem, and they are working with someone else. So hopefully not only are they applying it directly, but it's also creating a sense of community, a sense of cooperation and belonging. And then the last thing we're doing about it at URI is we've changed our curriculum for computer science. We have introduced a new course, Joy of Programming, which Professor Fay Wolf will talk about next. And so they have more preparation. Hopefully they'll feel more ready before taking it. And then a subtle difference is that we have women teaching both the survey course and the course I'm teaching, and women TAs, hopefully sending the message that women do belong. Thank you very much.
I'm Liu from the math department. And about 2 years ago, in the summer of 2013, Professor Thomas and I, we developed a project. And this project called Online Pre-Calculus Enhancement Project. Since the fall of 2013, we have been applied this project to the course called Math 131 is a pre-calculus, no, it's a calculus class. And then since then we have been running this project as a built-in project for the calculus class for 4 semesters straight. And then I just want to introduce this project to you. And this project is necessary because still program, but because Math 131 is a calculus class, and this is the second largest math class offered at URI, and unfortunately many students came underprepared. There are two groups of students belong to the underprepared students. First, they have been weak with the math courses. The second group actually is a bigger group. The student came, they have the preparation, but after summer break, after winter break, after 1 or 2 semesters of math, they basically just forgot. And those students just need a reminder, need a little practice that they can catch up with the new concept. So our project targets both of the group of students. And every semester, averagely, we have 8 to 9 sections of Math 131. So we're targeting a big group of students. And as tradition, 131 has very high unproductive rate. This is the one of the course on the provost blacklist course. And our unproductive rate is over 30% straight out for years. That's a straight result from the unprepared students. And also we have very limited resources to help the students. Even we do offer SI help, ACE tutoring, and office hours. As some people already mentioned, students reluctantly to really go there to get help. And on the other hand, as instructors and myself, we are overloaded, and I cannot offer too much office hours, and I cannot offer in-class hours to help those students to just refresh their memories. So it turned out a result that online project is necessary just to refresh their memory, to give them a little bit extra practice, such that most of this group of students can catch up with regular calculus stuff. So what do we do? We designed an online project, and the first week of the class, actually first day of the class, all calculus students take a gateway exam. And then either score 60 as a pass or score 0 as a fail. And for students who failed, we'll take this project, everyone who failed. And the failing rate, amazingly, was 50 to 55%, depends on which semester we were in. And then those students who failed, we take this project, and this project is a bi-weekly project, only 4 mini lessons. Each mini lesson has highlights, which is a PDF file, content all the materials you need to know, and content in examples, and several examples on each project. Then we develop our own videos, so each lesson will have about 4 videos. Each video is about 10 to 15 minutes long. Not too short, not too long, don't make them too bored. And then based on the videos, we gave a practice sheet which has answers. They can practice on their own basis. And also, very importantly, we offer an online practice quiz. This practice quiz they can take it unlimited. And I call it a qualified quiz. Without passing this quiz, they cannot take the project quiz, which gives them the credits back. And they get the most overwhelming response for the project qualified quiz. This is their favorite item in the whole project. And then when they have enough practice, most of them can pass the qualified quizzes, and then they go to the project quiz, which is a 15-point quiz multiplied by 4 mini lessons, so they can gain 60 points. Students do have a chance. And we did some survey. Every semester we did a survey, and I can show you some idea here. The survey is optional. Students don't have to take it, but if they take it, for example, one semester, 115 students took the survey, and this one of the questions is how do you evaluate the online project overall wise? And 44 said, help me to avoid of retaking pre-calculus. And sorry, I can't see from this. And then keep me avoid of retaking pre-calculus and keep me right on the right track with 131. And also 50%, no, 49 students answered, help me with my algebra, hopefully get a better grade with 131. And then 44 said, okay, good project, but for calculus students, those who struggle with algebra, and very easy to follow, very efficient. We do have about 20% of students said this is nothing, not worth it. But remember, this group of the students, they are the weakest students in calculus, underprepared. Getting feedback like this is quite normal. And student comments are overwhelming. I have tons of them. I just listed the 3 I have. Some said, okay, I have always struggled with math, and this project helped me improve understanding dramatically. And the second one said, this project is just like jump-started my brain. They learned it, they knew the material. Now just need a refresher for them. And it was well designed, really carried out its purpose. And the third one said, I feel a lot more confident in my calculus class after completing this set of practice. I have tons of them like this. Okay. Influence for this project here is together we have with the math department had this practice exam a year ago, no, called placement exam a year ago. Along with this exam, placement exam and PCE project does help students a lot. We improve we don't say we improve. We lower down the DFW rate from over 30% in fall 2013 to 19% in fall 2014. This is and now the Math 131 is officially off the blacklist. Second, the PCE project become a blueprint for many math courses. We have a very good presentation to the math faculty. And then we show the responses from students. It was overwhelming. And then I didn't list it here. It's the math department, College of Arts and Sciences, co-sponsored another project similar to this one. We call it the CAE, College Algebra Enhancement Project for Math 111, which is pre-calculus course. And this course is the largest, one of the largest courses enrolled at the URI, which one of the highest DFW rate. So this summer we will work on it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vic Faywolf from the Computer Science Department. I'm going to be talking about an implementation of flipped classrooms. I was going to do a video for you to watch ahead of time, but Josh insisted I come and talk to you, so I'm going to do it in person. I have been teaching, I taught my first online class in 2002 where we actually made our own video lectures. So we've been doing it for like 13 years now. I flipped my classroom the first time 5 years ago, so I've had some experience with flipped classrooms, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I teach computing concepts. I'll call it CSE 101. It's a course for non-majors, it's a gen ed course. I also teach CSE 106, which is called the Joy of Computing. It's the course before the one Deborah talked about. And together, CSE 101 and 106, we're now funded by the National Science Foundation to make that the first, or to make that the AP Computer Science course, the new Computer Science Principles course in Rhode Island high schools. So they're basically introductory computer science courses that I'm talking about. One for gen ed, one for our majors. So some of the things we're doing, I flipped the classroom. What we mean by that is that I'm using video lectures. I have a whole bunch of my own, probably about 200 video lectures I made myself. But one of the things that I've found is that other people can do aspects of it much better than I can. So part of it, it's almost like what you do with a textbook. I go out and find other people's video lectures that work really well. In fact, I'm using the Khan Academy stuff. They've done a brilliant job in computer science, in my opinion. So I've stopped using my own lectures and using theirs because they're better. And when I'm talking about some really esoteric topic, it's really great to have someone else's video lecture who may be a bit more of an expert than I am. So there's a combination of video lectures, both of my own that I make. I have some tips at the end. I use Camtasia. I'll talk some about the pragmatics of flipping a classroom in a bit. But I make my own video lectures. I put them on YouTube free. It's until URI gets their own streaming server, which we're working on. But I make my video lectures out there for everybody. I do BYOD, bring your own device. So I have students bring their own devices to classrooms. I teach gen ed, so they're not all computer science students. You might say, oh, computer science students all have a computer. Most of your students, a vast majority of your students have computers. I bring a few to classroom just in case they don't. Quickly, a quick side note, I heard a lot of you guys talking about clickers. I personally think clickers are a really big waste of money. If all of your students have laptop computers, we have a Wi-Fi connection, and then just bring up Sakai, and you can do the same thing you can do with clickers. You're not making them buy clickers, you're not I'll get off the clicker hand. If you assume a BY or can actually implement a BYOD classroom where they have their own devices, you don't need clickers. But anyway, the other thing we do is a lot of cloud-based stuff so that our software is cloud-based. So when I have to bring a backup computer, I'm actually just bringing $200 Chromebooks. We have a few that I throw in my backpack in case a student doesn't have a computer. And with a Chromebook, as long as your software is cloud-based, then you don't, that's a good teaching device. One of the things that, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but I've done a similar talk for incoming faculty. They've actually had me do some of the workshops for incoming faculty. And I try and encourage them to stop lecturing. I don't lecture anymore. I go into class, I answer questions, I do the problem-based learning stuff, but I don't talk at them anymore. When I do feel I have to convey information by talking at them in some way, I do it in a video that they watch ahead of time, where they can stop me, rewind me. A lot of them tell me they fast forward me. But they don't have to sit there and actually listen to me convey information. They can do it on their own. And they can also then formulate questions on their own, post them on the discussion board without having to hear me say it, and then raise their hand with a quick question. That's an awful quick turnaround time, particularly for weaker students. So I don't lecture anymore. I do it with online videos for it. Here's how I structure a classroom. So actually the subtitle of my talk was, how do you allocate online time and in-person time? So you all have technology available. So we have the Sakai teaching system, which I actually am a believer in. You have the ability to make your own videos. So how do you allocate your in-person time versus your away time? So here's what I do up here. At the beginning, so what I'll do is I'll assign the students to do readings and video lectures ahead of time. I have two discussion boards in Sakai. One is a general discussion board, and one is the Ask the Teacher. So as they're watching the video lectures, they post questions they want me to go over in class because they didn't get something, or they want another example, or whatever it may be. So then that's what they do ahead of time. I also have them take notes because I give a quiz every class that encourages attendance, but they're open notes quizzes, so that they can come in and use the open notes, encourages them to take notes while they're watching the video lectures and engage. Then in class, this next group down there, I will start off by asking if there are any questions, and I will go over questions before they take the quiz. So this is the interaction with the professor that they like. I will then give them a quiz. It's BYOD. They all have devices in front of them, so they're all Sakai-based quizzes. Most of mine are quick true-false quizzes because I don't want to grade 200 quizzes every class. But I give simple ones to make sure you can send them, to do the video lectures and the readings, and for me to get some measurement of how they're doing. Then, for the most part, it's a problem-based. I'll give them problems. Often, the idea of flipped classroom, I mean, terms used a lot. What I mean by it essentially is that the lecture part is flipped. It's done at home. What you call a homework assignment is done in class, which is basically the problem-based learning. So they do their assignments in class. But here's the old model, and I used to teach the old way, lecturing and letting them go home and do homework, is when I lectured, they were all falling asleep. And I'm a pretty good, I can think of jokes, but I don't keep them awake, but they were falling asleep. And then we'd go home and be frustrated because they couldn't do their assignments at home. So now when they're doing them in class, they can call me over, they can call the TAs over. I spend most of my time walking around individually helping students. And you're amazed at how the students who are maybe weaker in the class, they don't mind raising their hand for a one-on-one because you're not asking a question out loud. They call over the professor or the TA and get some help. So it's actually worked very well with what you might consider some of the weaker or the less motivated students. So that's how we flip the classroom. I use Sakai extensively. If you haven't learned Sakai, one of my recommendations is spend some time. Climb the learning curve, it's worth it. I use the lesson mechanism in Sakai, so this is a Sakai lesson for one of my classes. It's got the learning objective at front. Each link is either a video lecture or online reading. If I have a textbook, then it wouldn't be a link, it would just be the chapter. And then I have the quiz they take in class. Sakai has a neat mechanism. You see the stars and the checks. The stars mean they haven't clicked on the link. The checks mean that they have. And you can make the quiz only come up if they've clicked on the links. Now, of course, in the beginning of the semester, I told them that check only comes up if they watch the entire lecture. But shh, all you have to do is click on it. They all figured it out after like two classes. But at least it's sensitive. Even if they're clicking on it, they're bringing it up. And it's not like they're ignoring it. And they can't come to class and get their few points for the quiz if they haven't done the stuff ahead of time. So Sakai supports that. So Sakai is actually, I found it a pretty good teaching system. It takes a learning curve. It's not quite as elegant as some of the other ones, but you can actually we run all of our classes online. I have a completely online degree program. Our digital forensics program's been an online degree program for like 5 years now. All taught through Sakai, doing this stuff. The last slide I have is just some resources in case you're interested in this. URI actually supports this kind of stuff pretty well. They have a site license for Camtasia to make your own video lectures. And Tim and his group have support. We'll teach you how to use Camtasia. It's remarkably easy. You basically talk to your computer. Whatever's on the screen is being captured. There's a wonderful pause button that you can pause and can get your ideas together before you say the next thing. Making video lectures is not hard. People sometimes get scared of it. They don't want to sound, stupid and umming and ahhing all the time, although most of us don't worry about that when we speak in person. And it has video editing. If you want to get into that, you can take stuff out of your lectures. So I have Camtasia up there. Again, Learn Sakai. It's got a really lot of features. If you haven't used Big Blue Button, you can do online, essentially, webinars right in Sakai. A lot of neat features that most of us don't use. Most of us just post our syllabus. But there are a lot of stuff you can do in Sakai. We're right now putting our stuff on YouTube, and URI is working to get a streaming server so we can keep our videos private if you wish to do that. And look around for other lecture videos. I spend a lot of my time looking for other people's video lectures. I love the Khan Academy computer science stuff. I use it in both of my classes. Not exclusively, I use other stuff as well, but I actually have to go through a whole course in Khan as a subset of my college course, and it's really good stuff. So that's just wanted to give you some tips on that.
Good morning. I actually want to give you a talk about what's called take-home experiment engineering classes. It's actually a project I did with my colleague, William Pan. So what we did and how and why we did it. Well, actually what we developed, basically take-home, I'd like to see what we have here. We developed actually a take-home hardware kit and software that we give to each student in the class. We actually developed take-home kits that we give to each student in the classroom to take home and do an experiment, similar to homework assignment. And basically, they were given to every student in the class, and we tell them you can use it. Basically, they use their own PC or laptop to do the assignment. And now, why we did it? Basically, to improve their understanding of system dynamic concept. Many students actually perceive system dynamics concept as very abstract concept, highly mathematical. They can't understand it. So you want to make it actually related to real hardware, real thing that they see at home and in real life, so they have a better understanding of these concepts. So what is this take-home kit that we actually developed? This actually has 3 components. We basically give them a box that they interface with the student PC and the experimental setup. Then we have developed actually a piece of software that they download from a website, and with this software actually they can run different experiments. And then we actually have an experimental setup that they connect to the box and they do. Here example, one of them is a DC motor with a speed sensor. We actually, throughout the course of this project, which ran for 3 years, we developed actually 5 experimental setups. One was a motor with a tag, where they can actually measure the response of a system to an input. They can see first order differential equation response, and they design a control system actually to control the speed. Other one, we developed actually a temperature sensor with encapsulation. You can put it actually in liquid. So they take home and they study actually the cooling rate of hot liquids. If they change the amount of liquid in the cup, the type of the liquid, and see how actually it cools. We developed, this is basically a steel beam with an accelerometer at the end, and they tried to study the vibration of the mechanical system. So they actually perturb the beam, and then measure the acceleration response. And they try to actually predict what will be the resonance frequency of the beam based on the beam characteristic, what's the cantilever length, beam dimension, materials, cross-section properties. By the variation of this beam experiment, where we added actually a motor, small motor, and then the motor actually, they increase the voltage to the motor. And at some point, the beam will hit resonance, where the beam will just start vibrating. And they basically, that simulate force response, similar to what they see in real life when, for example, when you're on your, sometimes your washing machine starts vibrating. And then the last one we actually, it's to control temperature. So we have a small copper plate at the bottom there, it has a heater at the bottom of it. There's a temperature sensor they put inside of it, and they try to heat that plate to a certain temperature. And we use the fan to give some disturbance. So every now and then, the fan turns on randomly, trying to send a puff of air. And that tests how good is the control system, trying to control the temperature or not. Here's how actually we do it. We put the kids component in a bag, and we give each student one of these bags, and they take it home. Normally they keep it for 1 week to 10 days. They actually sign a piece of paper that they return this at the end of the week, I think, so we don't lose it. And throughout the project, we have actually used them in 4 junior and senior level classes in mechanical engineering listed here. And how do we know if this is actually good? So we actually did some assessment to see. The main part of the assessment was the survey that we give to the student after they complete the experiment. It has actually 10 detailed questions to see their perceptions. We ask them about the concept that they learn, how they think that kid helped them learning concept versus other educational tools, for example, versus regular homework, versus the lectures, versus the textbook examples. The students also have to write a report after each experiment. So that's actually get graded, and we look at what they write there. And then also we try to give actually pre and post questions related to what we do in the take-home experiment. See if that actually, if the take-home kids have actually affected their learning. And we actually, this proposal actually were helped by Professor John Palmaitis from the School of Education at URI, who actually did the assessment for the project. So what did we learn actually after we did this project? That actually, they give actually, the take-home kids give a machine to the student to conduct experiment on their own. And the students actually were able to better understand several concepts in system dynamics. And from all the surveys in these 4 classes that run over several years, basically people have, we have got this conclusion, that they perceive take-home kids have contribution to understanding system dynamic concept, comparable at least to class lectures. So that tells you if students come to class lecture, they will learn a lot. And more effective than traditional homework and textbook. And where we're going with this, we have actually a proposal currently pending to expand this approach at URI and 3 other US universities. And also we want to change the interface to actually allow use of smartphones instead of just a PC, as most students right now have smartphones. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brian Dewsbury. I'm an assistant professor of biology. I teach Bio 101 in this room, actually, 287 students. When Josh asked me to give a lightning talk, I just kind of thought about the best way to really capture what I think happens in my classroom, or at least what I would like to happen. So I did what I asked my students to do. I reflected. And so what you're about to hear is, I guess, not just my reflection on what I think happens, but what we hope to have happen going forward. So I apologize in advance to the professors of literature in the audience. I am not a poet by training, but I did take a stab at, in a different kind of way, what happens in Bio 101. I want a community. I want a community of brothers and sisters, a community of learners, scholars, no hidden agendas, of soldiers who are willing to risk all to get wiser, of instructors and leaders, mothers and fathers who understand that without each other, we have no future together. I want a classroom that's alive and active, where feet move and hands wave, bristle and hectic, but the mind can pause to be reflective on each new morsel of knowledge gained, pure and seductive, where we grow from our differences, a force so constructive that we leave these walls with a different perspective. So we gather them by the hundreds and assemble them here, and they stare at each other paralyzed with fear when we say in small groups is how we will share the parts of ourselves that we are about to prepare for a journey to the edge of what we are aware. But wait, does anyone care? I mean, really care? 3 buses, no breakfast, but she is glad she came. 3 Fs, and incomplete, and $3 to her name. She's still trying to figure out this college game. Maybe it's okay to relax and aim for a C, another D. I want a community where every mind walks into class on time, where what we learn from each other, about each other, is just as satisfying as the chapters we read online and the jokes we tell to pass the time. I want a community where those who struggle already know that they are never truly alone, where the classroom community, the enrollment office, the financial aid office, disability services, the Women's Center, SOS, talent development, the LGBTQ Center, the Hillel, SACOFA, the Community Equity and Diversity Office, Academic Advising, the Counseling Center, the RAs, the Academic Enhancement Center, the Multicultural Center, all work together so that each student knows they are part of one family. I want a community of brothers and sisters. That community begins with me. Thank you.
This afternoon, David is going to tell us about how CS50 evolved from a very typical intro to computer science taught mainly to potential majors into Harvard's most popular course. We'll learn the lessons that he's learned from CS50 and lessons that he'll share with us, and hopefully we can put to good work here at the university. And he'll be also trying to tell us how the lessons of CS50 can be applied to other introductory courses in STEM disciplines and at other institutions. David?
Thank you for having me. My name is David Malan. I teach Computer Science 50, which is Harvard's Introduction to Computer Science and the Art of Programming, which is our course for majors and non-majors alike, and just finished my 8th year at the helm of this class. And the topic of CS50 and innovation more generally came up at lunch. And to be honest, it's always been very humbling, if not a little awkward, to hear these terms in the same sentence, because we, at least, and I specifically, never really set out to do anything I would call innovative. In fact, rather, when I inherited the course in 2007, there were problems that I viewed with the course. A lot of positive aspects certainly to the course. The course has been around at Harvard for some 20 years, but with each passing year, I would say that I set out with the whole team to try to identify and then solve certain problems. And I do concede that the net effect over the past 8 years has been significant. And when I look back on the videos that we have of 2007, since we have filmed and put absolutely everything online for these 8 years, it's a marked difference between 2007 and 2015. There's a lot more literally song and dance and flashing lights these days. And I hope to paint a picture at least of some of those decisions that we made along the way and reveal to you the aggregate effect. For context, the course has a long-standing history. It was always, at Harvard, considered to be a very good course, but it very much had a reputation to beware, like computer science, dare say, more generally. Even I, as a freshman in 1995, didn't even get up the nerve to shop this class, CS50, even though I was a bit of a geek, certainly, growing up, because it had this daunting reputation, and it felt like it was not for the uninitiated, which is a group I put myself among, but rather it was for the kids who surely must have been programming since they were 10 years old. And in terms of the trajectory of the course, though, just to give us some context, the course started out with about 100, 200 students in it back in the late 80s, early 90s. We enjoyed, like many people, a wonderful uptick in interest around the dot-com era. In fact, we peaked at 1996, which coincidentally was the year I finally got up the nerve to take CS50, in large part because computer scientist by the name of Brian Kernighan was moonlighting at Harvard that year and truly inspired me on this path. But then we, like a lot of institutions, had a bit of a lull for quite some years in the mid-2000s after the dot-com peak. But in more recent years, we've seen numbers like this. In fact, in 2006, we had 132 students in the class. We then jumped to 287 students the next year after the introduction of the first of the changes that I'll walk us through here today. What was striking between 2007 and 2008 was that this growth, no, not massively so versus 2006, almost all of that growth was in women, which was an interesting feedback for us to have. And then more recently, we've blown through those numbers and are indeed just past the economics class on campus as the largest on campus. And it really is a supermajority of non-majors these days, many of whom, a majority of whom we also describe as less comfortable. And in fact, that's the descriptor we use to describe a certain track within the class that I do think has been key to its success. So at the start of the semester, computer science, of all things, looks a little bit like this. Attendance helps us achieve more typical numbers later on. But in terms of who's in that classroom, what's been shifting over the past few years is that the class has been getting younger. For many years, we were predominantly sophomores with some freshmen and juniors and seniors and some graduate students, some extension school students and the like. But over the past few years, we've really seen a market shift toward a younger demographic, freshmen, which I attribute in part to, I think, the excitement around computer science more generally in industry and in students' minds. Two, I think awareness of the course, just as we've gained some critical mass. Also, Harvard has loosened some of its former requirements. Back in the day, you would have to fulfill your spoken language requirement in the first year. You would have to declare your concentration at the end of freshman year for many students, and these deadlines have now shifted a semester or two at the college more generally, which has opened up, I think, the ability for students to explore much more, which has been a powerful thing and a useful thing for us as well. And as HES there, just to provide context, we typically have 150, 200 students, adult learners, taking the course on campus or online, as well as a much larger audience these days through edX, which is the MOOC version of CS50. But this too has been striking, and this is just the trailing several years without even the most recent. These bars represent the three demographics that we bucketize students into. Students who are less comfortable, students who are more comfortable, students who are somewhere in between. And this is a complete self-description that we ask students to apply to themselves. And the rule of thumb is that if you did take APCS, or if you have been programming since you were 10 years old, you're probably in among those more comfortable. And if you're among those less comfortable, you probably know it. So you're a little unsure why you're in class that first week, just shopping the class. You're a little worried that you're not going to be able to cut it vis-a-vis a lot of your classmates. And so those students generally would label themselves, at our encouragement, less comfortable. And what's been changing is precisely that demographic. So the bottommost blue bar, the medium blue, if you will, in 2008 was 34% of the class. 34% of the class was less comfortable. And as of 2012, they were constituted 59% of the class, and more recently that's grown to closer to 68% of the class. And so much of the course's growth has been fueled not only among the non-majors on campus, but specifically among those students that self-describe as less comfortable, and who in years past, I would claim, would not have even considered stepping foot in a CS class, let alone remaining for the remainder of the term. As an aside, please interject at any point with any questions, concerns, or comments. Happy to chat bidirectionally along the way. But this is the visual that we actually started this past semester out with. And this came up in one of the breakout groups earlier today, where I've been fascinated and disappointed that despite consistent messaging over the past several years that 70-something% of the class has no prior experience, consistently do students come up at the beginning or at the end of class in those first couple of weeks and ask very intrepidly, do you think I can, if this is for me, I'm not a computer person. And so we put up this visual, even with 100 dots, 78 of which are dark green to represent those 78% of students, really to reinforce this message. And it's beginning to spread on campus, but even this, I would say, is still a hurdle for us. Even as we're the largest course on campus, there is absolutely this trepidation when it comes to considering trying one's hand at computer science. But ultimately, what they get is this message, and I think this has been key ultimately to drawing in that demographic and truly making the course more accessible. This is the sentence I say in the first lecture. This is the sentence that we commit to in the course's syllabus that what ultimately matters in the course. It's not so much where you end up relative to your classmates, but where you, in week 12, end up relative to yourself in week 0. In other words, we truly do take this to heart and mechanically take this to heart in the sense that grades at the end of the semester in CS50 are actually incredibly individualized, incredibly time-consuming as a result, but we do use all of the data we accrue from quizzes and the final project and problem sets, as I'll discuss in a moment. But those are really just starting points. I then have an email chain with 60 of our teaching fellows or teaching assistants, all of whom are responsible for 12 to 18 of the students in the class, and I ask them to give me one or zero more sentences on every one of their students, and either advocating for or against adjustment in some way. So the grades at the end of the semester really are attenuated to students' prior background. And that's a commitment we make. We have as many A's among the less comfy as among the more comfortable students, and that's very much deliberate. So what do we do in the course, and what did we do back in 2007? So in 2007, one of the first changes I made was to really overhaul the course's problem sets. I dare say the fundamental syllabus in CS50 is largely unchanged. We generally describe ourselves as an amalgam of CS1 and CS2, so it moves at a fairly fast clip, and it's fairly intense for most students. But we start where many courses start. We happen to use Scratch in the very first week of the class. This is a graphical programming environment whereby you can program logically by dragging and dropping puzzle pieces that snap together if it makes sense to do so. We transition in the second week of the class to a more traditional language, C, and we begin to talk about programming syntax and programming constructs in more depth, like conditions and loops and functions and the like. And then we begin to introduce the simplest of data structures. We talk a bit about arrays, and we hint at how you might represent a string underneath the hood as an array of bytes. And then we very quickly transition to a discussion of algorithms, and we do some binary search and some sorts. And we talk about how you might solve problems more efficiently. And indeed, then we begin to introduce more sophisticated data structures in linked lists and trees. And we even have, within the C portion of the course, students implement their own hash table, or try, fairly sophisticated data structures for those less familiar, that caps out their time spent in C and very low-level memory management. But along the way, and this is an oft-asked question, we do deliberately use C. It's because it's a relatively small, if challenging language, but it also affords us the opportunity to talk about and get as close to the hardware as possible so that students really have this bottom-up understanding. It doesn't go quite as low as assembly or the like, but rather allows them a foundation for further studies in CS or just a general understanding of how it all works. But then about 75% of the way in the term, we context switch to web programming. And we actually make this bridge by way of one of the problem sets, and we introduce a bit of PHP and JavaScript and SQL and HTML and CSS, and generally try to provide students with an off-ramp from the course, because for 50% of the students, roughly, CS50 is a terminal class. They won't take another computer science class, and so we want to make sure that they don't walk away feeling that they have learned how to program in C, but rather they've learned how to think computationally, and that they've learned how to program in C and Scratch and a bit of PHP and a bit of JavaScript, so that they're empowered at the end of the semester to actually go off on their own and solve some problems. To get them there, we provide them with fairly intensive experiences, each of which takes, on average, 12 to 15, sometimes 25 hours per week outside of class, and therein lies the course's reputation. But the first one is in Scratch. Implement anything of interest to you. In C, we introduce them to some fairly basic constructs involving loops and recreating Super Mario's pyramid, but just using hash symbols for the bricks. We then introduce the first of our domain-specific problem sets, the first one being cryptography. We have students implement a number of rotational ciphers, Caesar cipher or Vigenère, where A becomes B, B becomes C, or the like. And yet, at that same point too, do we begin to introduce and emphasize another track within the course. So beyond having less comfortable, more comfortable, and somewhere in between students, each of whom have different sections or recitations, so that move at different separate paces based on their comfort levels. We also have, for most of the problem sets, a standard edition, a specification that we expect 90% plus of the class to do, but also a hacker edition. And indeed, every page of the hacker edition is emblazoned with a watermark that says hacker edition, so you can sort of say you did the hacker edition. That generally appeals to 0 to 10% of the class, that covers similar material, but assumes greater sophistication and allows them to satiate what might be a more ardent interest in the material and assumes a greater background. So for the crypto problem set, for instance, we don't have them implement ciphers. We instead give them an Etsy password file from a typical Linux system with some cute usernames and encrypted passwords, and we challenge them to crack those passwords and write up code and argue the heuristics they've adopted with which to figure out by brute force what those passwords once were before they were encrypted. We transitioned mid-semester to a forensics piece set. And in fact, one of my favorite jobs I was telling you earlier in graduate school was interning for the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office doing forensics and essentially recovering information that may or may not have been there from bad guys' computers. And we use this ultimately as inspiration and also the experience of a buddy of mine who lost actual data from his camera to do the following. We walk around campus most every semester taking photos of people, places, and things on a digital camera. We accidentally format or corrupt that memory card. I then make a forensic image of it using a Linux program called DD so that we just give every student in the class a file that has a whole bunch of zeros and ones that once upon a time represented a sequence of JPEG images, and we challenge them to write C code with which to recover those images. Because it turns out JPEGs, sophisticated though the compression is, they each have a signature of just 4 bytes, so that if you see WXYZ essentially at the start as a pattern within the file, you can assume with high probability that here comes a JPEG, here comes another one, here comes another. So they write code that once it finally works, it doesn't work at all until they get it just right, and then when they hit enter, do 50 some odd photographs automatically recover and get saved onto their hard drive as a result of writing the code. Later in the semester, we transition to web programming, before then, it's misspellings, the problems that I alluded to earlier where we challenge students to implement their own hash table or trie, the goal of which is to implement the fastest spell checker they can. So whereas mid-semester we'd spend a good amount of time talking about asymptotic notation and running time in a theoretical way, we instead focus this time on real-time benchmarks, and we give students a text file of 140,000 English words, and we challenge them to load it into some data structure via which you can answer queries of the form, is this a word, is this a word, is this a word, as quickly as possible. Because we then benchmark their spell checker by feeding it really big text files like movie scripts, like the King James Bible, and any number of other scripts, and we challenge them to minimize their use of RAM and also their use of CPU cycles. And just for fun, on an opt-in basis, we have a leaderboard for this part of the term where students are invited to submit their results to the course's website, where then all students' names and numbers are ranked. And fascinatingly, many students, most students even do this these days, opting in, but invariably this incentivizes students to spend all the more time on this piece set more than any other. It's already hard, but invariably roommates submits his or her code to the leaderboard, gets a really good placement on the board, goes to dinner, comes back, realizes his or her roommate has bested them slightly by a few megabytes or by a few CPU cycles, and so there's been this sort of arms race to do better and better even than one's own friends or roommates. So an interesting side effect of a bit of healthy competition there. And then we transition to web programming. CS50 Finance is what we call the problem set in which students write their own eTrade.com like website, where they write PHP code in this case to talk in real time to Yahoo Finance, get nearly real-time stock quotes back, and they implement the ability to buy and sell, so to speak, stocks using virtual dollars. And here too, we often have a leaderboard whereby we fairly irresponsibly give everyone 10,000 virtual dollars and challenge them to grow it as much as they can within the span of just 7 days. And invariably, there's some aspiring economists who realize this. Yahoo quotes aren't really real time, so you can just turn on the TV or any number of other news sources and effectively see 15 minutes into the future. So invariably, someone turns their 10,000 into $1 trillion over 7 days by playing penny stocks and the like, by effectively seeing the future. And all of those changes were rolled out in 2007, the first year that I inherited the course, and more recently did we redo the other half of the problem sets, essentially, one of which is a graphical problem set that builds on Eric Roberts from Stanford Stanford Portable Library. So we actually write a GUI, students write a GUI in C, but more easily than C would typically allow by way of this wonderful library put together. We have students now implement their own TCP/IP web server for HTTP, and this bridges our gap from the world of C and the command line to our world of web programming, where they actually write in C a program via which they listen to, receive actual HTTP requests and serve up static or even dynamic content. And then lastly is Mashup, which literally mashes together a couple of other APIs like Google News and Google Maps and has students implement an interactive website via which you can type in a zip code or a city's name, whisk your way there visually, and then see little markers that represent news articles pertinent to that particular neighborhood. So suffice it to say, we go from 0 to 60 quite fast over the course of the semester, but I do think this too has been key to some of the numbers and indeed the success of the class over time, because now as I'll transition from the sort of rigorous side of things, there's also this cultural side that I think has been key to retaining students and getting them successfully from the beginning to the end of the semester. And indeed in 2008, we introduced what we call the CS50 Fair. This was the result of, in 2007 and nearly all years prior, are having final projects in the class for which students are challenged to implement most anything of interest to them, so long as it draws on the semester's lessons somehow, albeit subject to their teaching fellow's approval, just to help calibrate what's realistic and what's acceptable. And we then had them present their final projects to 10 or 15 of their classmates in sections or recitations in an incredibly boring fashion, and a fashion that no one really wanted to be there. I physically couldn't even make it to all of the presentations, even though I wanted to. And so we decided to draw some inspiration from what I recall from middle school science fairs, where you actually put everyone in the same room together and bring people together. And indeed, that's what we now do. At the end of the semester, all 800 students, or that year all 300 students, came together in a large space on campus. We divvy them up into shifts nowadays to fit them into the space. And nowadays, some 2,200 students, faculty, and staff from across campus come to see, of all things, computer science final projects. And everyone brings their laptops and sets it up on bar height tables. There's, as you can see, balloons. There's also music. There's also recruiters from some of the more popular tech companies, Facebook and Google and Microsoft, who are there, one, to chat up our own students, but also two, to draw back some of the older students who want to talk about possible internships. But the focus, and indeed the density of the room, is almost entirely about students. And it's not at all competitive. There are no awards for best project. Instead, it's just this opportunity to celebrate and look at what everyone has accomplished and eat popcorn during the CS50 Fair. And so these shots here are very typical of students just demoing their projects. As an aside, to further break the ice, and this was something we did at the last minute back in 2008, we also give every student about 10 smiley face stickers, and every attendee is given like a printed program that has placeholders for 10 smiley face stickers. The idea being, for every student you talk to while in attendance, he or she should give you a sticker, which then entitles you to an entry in the raffle, which then entitles you to a fabulous prize, potentially like an Xbox or Wii or PlayStation or the like. But this also, I think, is testament to sort of the little details that we've tried to think about to incentivize not only our own students to be interested in and to want to attend, but also draw in a broader demographic as well, since effectively this is an advertising vehicle for subsequent students or subsequent semester students as well. And students do amazing things. In fact, it's a little presumptuous of me, certainly, but I'm always amazed by how many projects are inspired by topics and techniques that we did not teach in the class. And indeed, that's thematic. So many students go off and learn a little bit of Objective-C or Java, or in this case, using a little USB device called Leap Motion, which is an infrared device that lets you make hand movements like an Xbox Kinect, but have it control your Mac or PC. And so Andy here was doing exactly that, and you can't quite see, but there's a digital keyboard on the screen, and when he moves his fingers in space, the virtual hand and keyboard are actually playing music there. And this is all the result of, again, a class that has 78% of students with no prior programming experience. And this, hands down, from 2008 was my favorite photo of an expression caught in real time. But I think more simply, we also instituted a number of other things, especially as the class started to grow. So in 2009, we introduced CS50 lunches, which are just an opportunity to make a big class feel small. And we usually hit up an alum or a local company to sponsor the check at a local restaurant. We go to a place called Fire and Ice, which is just kind of a fun vibe. And these days we bring 50 or so students to lunch with me and the teaching fellows and maybe these friends or from industry or alumni, just to have very casual chit-chat almost every Friday afternoon when we don't have class, and to, again, sort of allow students an opportunity to chat with each other, chat with the staff, talk about industry, talk about how class is going, but generally make what otherwise feel like the biggest class at Harvard feel so much more intimate. And indeed, this also proves to be an interesting sort of recruiting ground for the future teaching fellows, because you begin to sense exactly who really has some passion for not only the material, but the experience, such that they might want to remain part of it the subsequent year. So then, in 2010 or 11, we introduced what we call the CS50 Hackathon, pattern to our branding here. The CS50 Hackathon was actually inspired by what we learned Facebook does and other companies nowadays. And indeed, one of our former head teaching fellows was at Facebook at the time, and we pretty much asked him for inspiration as to how to run this event. And so what we do is we invite students at the end of the semester to RSVP for the hackathon. If they choose to partake, they arrive in a big space on campus, or in years past at Microsoft, which is down the road, at around 7 p.m. with their laptop, sometimes with their pillow, because we keep them there till 7 a.m. And around 9 p.m. we serve pizza, around 1 a.m. we serve Chinese food, and for anyone still standing, at 5 a.m. we have a few shuttle buses take us to the local IHOP. And throughout those 12 or so hours, our students challenged and encouraged to, and expected to at that point, work on their final projects, but in a very social, very collaborative environment around the course's staff, around each other. And it's also meant really to be, we hope for many students, one of those very memorable, long-lasting college experiences. But again, of all things, what effectively involves just doing your homework, but packaged up in a way, and an experience created in such a way that hopefully it's long-lasting and also allows them significant returns on their time. So this might be 9 p.m. in a typical hackathon. This is throughout the hackathon. We introduced vegetables a year ago, which is probably a true innovation over the past few years for us. And this is about 4 a.m., also taken at one of those hackathons. So office hours, what's the support structure like for a course like this? Besides the course's lectures, which are twice a week, both on campus and available online, and the course's sections, which are led by the teaching fellows, which are 90 minutes once a week, and opportunities to go through material in more detail at a different pace, we also offer office hours, essentially 9 p.m. to midnight on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And for many, many years, these were in a horribly depressing basement of a science center on campus, complete with fluorescent lights and cubicles and workstations and keyboards. But around 2010, we realized most every student coming to office hours is bringing his or her laptop, pushing the keyboard out of the way from the workstation and just plopping down. And that was an opportunity for us to unplug, so to speak, from the labs. And we moved to the undergraduate dining halls instead. So that nowadays, depending on the night, we have between 550 and 350 students coming for all things office hours, which for us are one-on-one opportunities for help. And to achieve one-on-one, we bring 20 to 30 of the course's teaching staff, the teaching fellows, most of whom are themselves undergraduates. And it's an environment quite like this, where we have the large tables of the dining hall. Thankfully, there's free food at that hour, like bagels and chips and soda and the like. But it's an opportunity to achieve and receive one-on-one assistance from one's teaching fellow or any other member of the staff. And indeed, these have been this is a good problem to have. The popularity of these and attendance at these has been steadily increasing. In fact, we have sometimes more students at office hours at night than we do in the lecture hall, for which we had a photo earlier. And that's a wonderful thing, I think, because if there were ever an active learning environment, it's hands down this kind of environment, and certainly not the lecture environment. And that too has been a trend for us. Even though we do have fairly traditional lectures, and even though we capture them in video form for students, they really are the secondary mechanism by which students learn and absorb the course's material. Hands down, it's the course's problem sets, and by proxy, these things like office hours that I dare say have the highest returns for students. So clearly posing for the camera. Sometimes we get nastier looks than that, but these are students working alongside each other into the night at office hours. As an aside, and I'm just really happy this is working out, we're moving away. We're too big for most of the house dining halls now. But to solve this problem, Harvard has a beautiful old library called Widener Library that has a massive reading room from yesteryear that has some 200 plus seats in it. And we're actually going to be moving office hours, at least on our smaller nights, Mondays and Tuesdays, to that space, which I actually love the marriage of a building that frankly even I as a student had no reason to go to after 1996 when I switched into computer science. And so here too, we're actually trying to collide worlds yet again. That was the original motivation for the dining halls, to have students from the humanities and social sciences and other fields sitting down next to classmates in CS50, just looking over their shoulders, curious about what they're doing in computer science. And we're hoping to do that all the more now in truly a library-like environment. And then there's Puzzle Day, which is the last of our traditions, I would say, in terms of events, which we instituted some years ago to send a very explicit message at the start of the term that computer science is not about programming, even though that's certainly a tool that computer scientists might use, but it's about problem solving. And with some friends and alums at Facebook, they kindly come to campus every year for the past few years, bringing a package of riddles or problems, none of which require a computer, none of which have anything to do with computer science. And we invite students to participate in teams of 2, 3, or 4 for 3 hours and solve as many of these puzzle challenges as they can. And this happens smack dab in the middle of Harvard's shopping period, which is the week during which they can attend classes before they have to register. And so it's meant to be this sweet spot on a weekend so that students who are still thinking about trying to figure out what CS is, an opportunity for them to come together and see not only the collaborative side of things and the social aspect, but also the reasoning aspect of it, irrespective of needing a computer, even though everyone brings it anyway these days. So I thought I'd look lastly at a few hopefully innovations, or at least the challenging decisions we've made, challenging insofar as they've run up against the most resistance on campus, but it's taken us several years to get to the point of success with these, but these two were introduced over the past several years to solve specific problems. The first I describe as SAT on SAT, or Harvard's nomenclature for satisfactory, unsatisfactory grading option. Back in the day, CS50 had a pass-fail grading option, which like most places just means you either get a pass or you get a fail, and the bar for pass was D- or higher. But the real catch with that option was that, at least at Harvard, for students to elect pass-fail, you have to get up the nerve to get a little pink sheet of paper, come up to someone like me at the end of class, presumably with all of your classmates kind of watching you as they're filing out, and ask for my signature and my blessing that you can take the class pass-fail. And I long worried that this was, one, not only difficult socially for students to do, but it also means like they need to come up to someone like me and say, I can't cut it in this class, can you please let me take the class pass-fail, which is absolutely not the message we wanted. Rather, I would be thrilled if most of the class took the class pass-fail so as to assuage any concerns or discomforts they have about exploring an otherwise very unfamiliar field to them. So long story short for us, SAT on SAT was a workaround whereby it's a C- or higher, which frankly I think is a better cutoff for saying someone's work is satisfactory or not. But more importantly, it's completely self-service. Students check a box on a website, there's no human interaction with me. We advise them by way of the lectures themselves as to what this option means. And thankfully, over the past few years, whereas we used to have 3% of students taking the course pass-fail, we're now up to 15%. And we found that this has based on the data we've seen thus far, we've seen that this option seems to correlate too with demographics that were historically less inclined to take the class as well. We also introduced this most recent year a so-called regret clause into CS50 syllabus. This caused me the most drama and headaches this year. It was well worth it, but it was meant to solve this problem. We have a long history, as many CS courses, with academic dishonesty, whereby students copy each other's code and submit it, even though we hope we are super clear in the syllabus, in the first lecture, and in every single problem set do we repeat the course's policy verbatim on the first page of the specification. But even so, about 3% of the class is referred to the administrative board or the honor board at the end of the year for crossing some line. However, I've long assumed and long suspected that many of these decisions, and we know this from the case's outcomes, were the result of just stupid late-night decisions, often 4 a.m., no sleep, no food, and a huge amount of stress. And so what we introduced to the course's syllabus was just one additional sentence, which essentially said that if you do cross some line, but come forward to me privately within 72 hours of having crossed that line, we'll handle the situation entirely internally. We will not refer it to Harvard's administrative board. Which did not play well with Harvard's administrative board for understandable reasons, but it was important to me to draw a very clear line in the sand that we were creating a safer space that would still have consequences. The syllabus also disclaimed that we would likely fail the student for that assignment, but there is no longer a risk of being expelled from school for the year, which is the worst outcome that might happen in something like that. And remarkably, we had 19 students come forward under this clause over the course of just 3 months, so almost 2 students per week. And what was more interesting still, and rather a surprise, it had no effect on the frequency of academic dishonesty in the class that we detected in the usual way. So our number of formal cases at the end of the semester manifested no statistical change, which suggests that this was a demographic of students for whom there really was a teachable moment, if you will. These were students that would have sailed under our radar. Most of them had crossed some line, but there was never an opportunity to chat with me or their teaching fellow and have it actually mean something. And rather, these students historically, presumably, were just holding their breaths effectively till the end of the semester, just hoping they didn't get caught. And it was remarkable. I mean, a number of the students broke down visually into tears. We had very intimate discussions about issues they were having back home with their families. And so really, as a side effect of trying to chip away at our challenge of academic dishonesty, I think we really solved a latent problem that we hadn't even previously identified. Of course, this meant a lot of work in terms of time, but certainly well worth it. And the compromise, as an aside, we reached with the university was we'll now report such transgressions centrally, but not to a punitive board. They'll be referred only to essentially the Bureau of Study Council, which would mean they have like a half-hour advisory session, but still no punitive consequences, which I think is important for the success of this. And then lastly, and this is representative perhaps of the course's emphasis on technology, we do film absolutely everything in the class. And this is largely the result of, one, we have a lot of continuing education students who have historically taken the course online, even across the world, online at any hour. We also started offering the course to MBA students at Harvard, which is across the Charles River, which is far enough that they couldn't logistically get to campus, to the college campus, so we would literally stream it in real time to them. As a side effect of that, about 40%, well, 40% of CS50's undergrads now don't attend lectures, but do watch online, either in real time or on demand after. Fun fact is that a non-trivial number of CS50 students watch the course live in real time online from presumably their beds at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. So that's always fun to see how many students are tuning in live to the stream. But this too has opened up for us a challenge in terms of the university's own policies and philosophy around what it means to be physically attendant in class. And in fact, I have long felt that, again, lectures in CS50 certainly don't primarily characterize the learning process. And so for me, it's a very dated notion that just because CS50's lectures are Monday, Wednesday, 1 to 2 p.m., why should a student who has a conflict 1 to 2 p.m. not be able to take CS50, or conversely, not be allowed to take some other course? We finally have a compelling technological solution to this, and frankly, based on the quality of the videos, based on the fact that we have verbatim transcripts that are searchable and potentially hyperlinkable to related resources, the fact that students can rewind and fast forward and pause, so many reasons that it is a superior experience, frankly, to be sitting in bed watching online than to be sitting in an anonymous theater with some 799 classmates. It's just felt right to me that we enable students to take CS50 even if there is some conflict. And so as of now, we're actually the only course at Harvard that officially is whitelisted as allowing students to take both CS50 and another class that meets Monday, Wednesday, 1 to 2. But I hope this begins a ripple effect whereby we as a university no longer primarily define a course in terms of its lectures and recognize instead that there are office hours and sections and events and other opportunities for students truly to learn the material. And lastly, there's the course's culture, and this is sort of the sillier note, and indeed I'll end with a video that was recently shown to our so-called pre-frosh, the students who were accepted and were visiting campus just last weekend, thinking about attending Harvard. The CS50 has somewhat organically, but also somewhat deliberately acquired a bit of a reputation as having a culture, and I deliberately wrote it as this because it's often described as cult. And based on some recent evaluations of the course this past semester, students wrote that the class has a culture, more of a culture than a class, a big community. Wonderfully nice to see. But then if you dig a little deeper into the most recent evaluations, you also see almost cultish, cult-like, maybe a bit cultish, it's a cult. So we have then Deliberately, though, encouraged at least this sort of sillier side of the course. I've felt, for better or for worse, that because we've long maintained the course's rigor and reputation, hopefully, and even as we've introduced a messaging and a tone of accessibility and a friendliness even to students without any prior experience, that we haven't done so by throwing material away or chipping away at the workload. And indeed, CS50 remains among the general education program, which is an optional part. I think the average for a gen ed class at Harvard is 2 hours of homework a week, and for us it's 12. And so I've taken comfort in the fact that we can fall back on this rigor even if we want to be a little silly or ridiculous. And so we give and throw at students things like CS50 stress balls. We learned a little bit about laser etching recently in the e-engineering lab, and so now you can get this little electrical socket that says CS50 socket on it, or CS50 sunglasses. We even chartered CS50 shuttles. But the goal, and perhaps the most deliberate piece of branding, I would say, is this shirt that we give to every student nowadays at the end of the semester that quite simply says, I took CS50, which we aspire to make mean something on campus, and hopefully it indeed does, and that it is some badge for students, especially that 78% for whom taking a computer science class was previously perhaps out of the question for them, but instead is something that they successfully did. And indeed, that's ultimately our goal, to get every student, irrespective of his or her prior background, to the end of the semester, and to provide that support structure in terms of time and in terms of team power to ensure that success. So before a few questions, I'd love to show you the 2-minute film we put together for the pre-frosh. I'll dim the lights, and this is what paints perhaps a more visual and audio version of what CS50 is for us.
CS50, Harvard University's Introduction to the Intellectual Enterprises of Computer Science and the Art of Programming. Dedicated and passionate and committed. And duck face, David. I'm here today with about 4,000 students, and we're going to find out what they're up to, working on their final projects.
At this point in the night, we're starting to hit the coffee pretty hard.
I really think that many of these ideas can be adopted for any number of fields, certainly within STEM, but also beyond, since really the fact that we are a computer science class and CS50 instead of something else 50, I really do think is just an implementation detail. And in fact, I've lost count of how many other departments now have fairs since 2008. There's an applied math fair, there's an applied physics 50 fair, and a number of other fairs on campus. There's a design fair that's happening next week, so there's actually been a wonderful ripple effect even on campus in trying out some of these ideas that I dare say we've beta tested in our CS class. But happy to take any more questions. Yes, please.
Can you describe how you measure the learning outcomes? Because as you mentioned, I really like your sentence. You talked about CS is not about programming, but about problem solving. But that's really hard to measure.
It is. We do it by proxy of problem sets, which are programming assignments, which are assigned nearly weekly by way of 2 exams, or quizzes as we call them, and then 1 final project. The problem sets are worth 50% of one's overall grade. We drop the lowest score, and we generally assess those on a number of axes. Correctness being one, but also scope, just how much of a problem set did a student attempt. 3 would be design, what is the quality of the student's code, irrespective of the fact that it actually works, and an evaluation of the style of their code, which would be the aesthetics and such. The final projects, meanwhile, are meant to get a sense of just how much a student has done on his or her own without the support structure of a long specification or a teaching fellow guiding them step by step. And the exams are meant to assess more of the student's conceptual understanding of material that isn't necessarily teased out by problem sets or the project. Sure. Yes, please.
Can you imagine how you might implement some changes in the culture, and you've got all this swag and the alumni? How might you implement some of these changes in an environment where you don't have all those resources?
Sure. The question is about how might you go about implementing some of the cultural aspects, especially the swag and things that require money, in another environment. To be honest, this was just a problem for us to solve. In retrospect, and now we sort of fight this reputation of having all of these resources and being a very sort of resource-rich course, but that is entirely the result of our having beaten the bushes for several years. And for instance, the CS50 lunches, I wanted to start those up. I turned to the department and asked if we had the funds to do weekly Friday lunches, and the answer was no, not really. And so I started sending off some emails to friends of mine who were at Facebook and Google and Microsoft, and I asked, hey, would you like to come to campus and represent Microsoft or Google or Facebook and chat up students about recruiting opportunities, but also talk to them about your undergrad experience here and what life is like in industry. And so we've cultivated, hopefully, what are very synergistic and bi-directional relationships that benefit the students and bringing us all together, but also have an angle with which the companies are comfortable. And even things like the fair. So the recruiters are there in part to be an opportunity to discuss, but we also ask them to contribute the raffle prizes, for instance, or even some cash with which to supply the food or the drinks and the like. So it's not at all that Harvard is sending us these massive resources, even though unfortunately that's sort of been the perception. But rather that anytime we've needed money, we've sort of turned to friends or tried to make a case somewhere else. And a lot of it has come from industry, and certainly I think tech benefits from that relationship, but STEM too, I would think more generally has that opportunity. And even beyond STEM, I would argue that a lot of companies have the right people in the right places who realize that you don't need to be a CS major to actually go work for Google or Microsoft. So I would be creative is the takeaway, and write someone out of the blue asking them for a hand. Thanks.
So money is one resource, but people are another resource. Is this all you doing this, or do you have other people, staff that works with you on this?
We definitely have other staff. In the earliest days, it was mostly me and my apartment doing a lot of it, certainly. But we've always had a teaching fellow-student ratio about 1 to 12, 1 to 15, and so that we do enjoy on campus. The average at Harvard is 1 to 16 as a ratio, and we made the case, and this does require resources of 1 to 12, given that there is so much of an apprenticeship model and support structure here. But also about half of our staff is volunteers. So I keep describing teaching fellows who are paid by the university, who teach sections, grade work, hold office hours, but we also have what we call course assistants within CS50. This isn't a Harvard-wide thing, of alumni. And we had 40 such folks this past year who just contribute on a volunteer basis 4 hours of their time, and they help us out at the office hours. And they too get the sweatshirts and they invited to all of the events. So we tried to make it a staff culture as well, but the upside is that we have a staff of nearly 100 persons to support 800 students. So there too, we've tried to be creative with the solution.
And you are the only faculty member?
Yes. Sure, please.
I had another question about the sort of mini competitions that you have, and I think that's fantastic. And I was wondering, are the students just motivated just by competition, or is there any sort of incentive in the grading, or are they just sort of excited to compete?
Hopefully the latter. There is no incentives. We give no forms of extra credit. There are no makeup opportunities. You get no extra credit for the hacker editions. It's all karma and hopefully humble bragging rights, if you will, and trying to create just the mindset of wanting to do those things. And for many students it works. I'll concede that there's a psychological upside of just offering the hacker editions, because about 10% of the class starts doing them, then about 5% of the class, then about 2.5, then 1.25. So we sort of get this very predictable decay. But there's also the presumption on the part of especially the less comfortable students that at least I'm not in competition with the more comfortable students, because there is this other outlet for them, both the hacker editions and also the more comfortable sections, which are graded independently as well. So it actually works in both regards, even if a very small number of students are actually doing them. Yes?
Have you ever considered making the lecture part of your course completely online and just doing the, you know, giving that to the students, go watch it on your own, and then we'll focus on the more hands-on, individualized?
It's a good question. To some extent, yes. And there's a few answers to that. One is that happens organically anyway for about half of the class, so we're approximating that experience.
Only half the students show up?
By the end of the semester, yeah. We're at somewhere between 40 and 50% physical attendance. But my hope is that with the lectures, especially since we do enjoy this beautiful environment, the fact that we, at least in lectures, and it only slightly comes out in the video, I actually try to use lectures for as many of those memorable moments as possible, bringing students up on stage to represent bits by holding their hand up if there is 1, or put it standing like this if there is 0, doing things with pointers by using your left and your right arms, and doing any number of demonstrations that involve students. So for me, the value of lecture is really the theatrics of it and this sort of shared social experience. Even if only 8 students might participate some lecture, the hope is that, you know, this is not a perfect analogy, but there's a little something different about like listening to a CD versus like going to a concert. And I wouldn't liken all of our lectures to concerts, but at least trying to have that emotional reaction, at least for the subset of students who want that engagement and want that inspiration. With that said, we've decreased the lengths of the lectures last year from 90 minutes to 60 minutes. This year I'm going to probably axe 25% of the lectures, just so that we can really, for any lecture where there were no opportunities for memorable moments, students coming up on stage and the material is a little drier but good to go through, we'll probably factor that out to video. We've been collaborating with some friends at Yale this semester such that there will be no lectures at Yale, but rather the Yale undergrads will watch CS50's lectures either live or on demand, but we have been recruiting teaching fellows and course assistants, and we'll hold office hours and sections and a CS50 fair in New Haven as well. So that'll be a truer implementation of that proposal. Thank you so much. Stick around for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very informative, inspirational, entertaining keynote.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for sticking out to the end. Please fill out the surveys, be honest, and put them in, there's a little thing at the back, just put them on the floor, it's fine.